If you've spent any time studying the Second World War, you know that some of the most decisive battles weren't won by tanks or planes, but by the cold itself. At Stalingrad, the cold was so brutal it cracked metal. In the forests of Karelia, it swallowed entire squads before dawn. On the Eastern Front, winter wasn't just weather. It was a weapon used by those who understood it and feared by those who didn't. Yet buried within the accounts of frozen trenches and icebound marches is a survival trick so effective, so absurdly simple, that modern outdoor gear still struggles to match its raw performance. Soldiers who adopted this method didn't just survive, they outlasted foes who were better equipped on paper. And the secret wasn't technology, it was a piece of winter wisdom older than the war itself. This hack is one of those rare pieces of wartime ingenuity that actually works better today, because we now understand the science behind it. But in the field, soldiers didn't need science. They had experience, hunger, desperation, and the ability to improvise with whatever was on hand. They discovered something that allowed their bodies to hold heat in situations where modern synthetic clothing would fail the moment it got wet or compressed. And once you learn how this method works, you'll understand why some of the toughest cold-weather fighters, Finnish ski troops, Siberian regiments, and mountain units on all sides, embraced it instinctively. They weren't being clever. They were being practical. And, well, that practicality still applies to anyone facing deep winter today. So, let's talk about the science behind it for a moment. Loft, in simple terms, is the ability of a material to trap air and create insulation. The fluffier and more open the structure, the better it keeps heat in and cold out. That's why materials with good loft have been prized by those who really know what it takes to survive in the cold. The survival hack rested on the principle that natural loft insulates better than dense manufactured material. It's a simple idea, but honestly it makes all the difference when the temperature drops. You know, the greatest misconception in modern winter gear is that the thicker the coat, the warmer you will be. Soldiers in World War II learned the hard way that bulk becomes useless when the fabric gets wet, crushed or frozen. Down collapses, wool gets heavy, and cotton becomes, well, lethal because it traps moisture. The hack that saved lives was, interestingly enough, using dry natural materials to create loft, an airy insulation layer inside the clothing that didn't rely on fabric technology at all. Finnish troops stuffed their boots and tunics with dry grass, cattail fluff, straw, and even shredded birch bark. Siberian soldiers collected moss and tucked it between their base layers and overcoats. Some German units, desperate for warmth, lined their clothing with newspaper, horsehair, and spare rags. What linked all of these materials was their structure. They created thousands of tiny air pockets, and those air pockets trapped heat so effectively that a soldier could stand through nights that would, well, kill a man wearing a heavy coat alone. You know, this idea is still used today in primitive survival schools and long-distance winter expeditions. If you lose your jacket insulation, you can restore warmth simply by creating loft inside it. Even in modern life, if your gear fails or temperatures drop beyond forecast, This technique can save your core body temperature. Now, let's talk a bit about controlling moisture. This is crucial, as managing moisture can make the difference between comfort and hypothermia. It's all about keeping dry and ensuring that any dampness doesn't rob you of precious warmth. So, a practical civilian example is winter camping. If you have a jacket that isn't performing, you can, gather dry grass, stuff it inside the lining, and restore warmth in just a few minutes. And if your boots lose insulation, you can actually use leaves or cattail fluff as a temporary liner. This isn't just theory, it's the same trick, that soldiers relied on at -20 and beyond. The effectiveness of this hack really increased when soldiers controlled moisture like it was ammunition. Those who survived the coldest fronts treated moisture with the same caution they treated bullets. Even a tiny amount of dampness could destroy the insulating properties of the natural materials tucked inside their clothing. The result was a strict winter discipline. Stay dry at all costs, and dry everything the moment you stop moving. Finnish ski patrols would remove layers before skiing to avoid sweating. Soviet soldiers rotated socks under their tunics where body heat dried them. German troops slept with gloves, scarves and foot wraps tucked against the chest so they would be dry by morning. Any wet material, even grass insulation, was replaced immediately with dry filler. You can actually apply this in real life by paying attention to your activity level during cold conditions. Remove a layer before starting a steep climb so your sweat doesn't soak your clothing. If your gloves or socks get damp, just use your body heat to dry them out. And if you're ever forced to improvise insulation, you should really prioritize changing out wet material fast, because wetness is what kills loft. When you think about it, renewable insulation is all about using resources that can be replenished or reused, instead of relying solely on manufactured gear. It's not just about staying warm once, it's about making sure you can keep warm again and again, no matter what the conditions throw at you. The hack worked because, it turned the environment itself into a renewable source of insulation. Modern winter gear is fantastic until it tears, burns, gets drenched or fails during multi-day exposure. Soldiers in World War II didn't have the luxury of carrying backups. What they did have was an endless supply of natural material around them. Instead of depending on gear that degraded, they learned to replace insulation constantly. Finnish troops, gathering grass before dusk, were practicing survival, not comfort. Soviet soldiers stuffing their boots with moss weren't trying tricks. They were rebuilding their insulation after every march. These improvised layers could be refreshed daily, sometimes even hourly, giving them an advantage over soldiers who relied on a single heavy coat. This philosophy is, honestly, just priceless today for anyone who spends time outdoors. If your insulation fails during a winter hike, you can rebuild it using dry plant material. And, if you're stranded in a vehicle during a blizzard, you can harvest seat stuffing, paper or fabric scraps to recreate loft inside your clothing. If your sleeping bag loses warmth, you can line it with leaves or grass for an emergency fix. So, as we've seen, these old methods really do have a place in our modern world. Next time you're out in the wild, or even just facing an unexpected cold snap, remember these simple tricks. Don't rely solely on fancy gear. Sometimes the knowledge passed down through generations is all you need. Try it yourself, share it with others, and keep this practical wisdom alive. This World War II hack still beats modern gear because, well, it isn't dependent on technology. It's dependent on physics. Heat comes from your body. Insulation simply slows its escape. Any material that traps air becomes insulation, and, well, the more air pockets it creates, the warmer you become. Soldiers who understood this outlasted brutal winters that wiped out battalions. Their gear wasn't better. Their understanding was. And that's why this hack still matters. It doesn't rely on brand names, specialized equipment, or expensive fabrics. It relies on knowing how to manipulate heat, moisture, and natural materials in the field. If you can find dry grass, bark, leaves, fluff, or even scraps of paper, you can build insulation that rivals modern gear when used correctly. If this deep dive into World War II cold weather survival inspired you, taught you something new, or strengthened your appreciation for the fieldcraft that saved thousands of lives during the harshest winters in military history, then make sure you subscribe to In the Beginning and share this video. Keeping these forgotten skills alive keeps us prepared for whatever the future throws at us.